Scott Grayson with his Grayson's Grades. You can check out the whole list over at 973ESPN.com. Scott, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How you doing, Josh?
Doing well. So I want to first start, if you don't mind, I'm going to go all the way down to the Fs because this whole situation before the game absolutely baffled me. So Caleb Sturgis, and from everything I understood, he's basically walking around without a helmet on. I cannot laugh at this. And he gets hit in the head and goes down the ground, and apparently no one really notices at first. And that's why he didn't play last night, because he's being evaluated for a concussion. I mean, is this one of the most bizarre things you've ever heard in your life?
It is one of the most bizarre things that I've ever heard of, although it's not too hard to believe because nobody really watches the kickers. They go out and do their own thing in warm-ups. And, I would like to think that this is a message to any of those guys when they go out for warm-ups now, put a helmet on because, look, I gave him an F because, I just think it was a mistake on his part to go out there without one just in case something like this happens. He's in a kicking competition. And for all intents and purposes now, I think it pretty much gave the job to Cody Parkey, all because of this. So that's why I gave him an F. I thought that it's just reckless abandon to walk out there when there's all kinds of footballs being kicked around the field. You never know when somebody's going to shank one. I know they're in the NFL, but, it's bizarre and it's crazy, but I gave him an F because it was his own fault.
And Cody Parkey hit his field goal last night. He had an opportunity, 40 yards, boom, hit it. I mean, that's pretty much what you want from your kicker, Scott, isn't it? Is that you just want your kicker to go out there, do the job, and you'd be happy.
Yeah, and it's Parkey taking advantage of the opportunity, too, because he got all the kicks with Sturgis, obviously, in the concussion protocol. And not only did he make his 40-yard field goal right down the middle at the end of the first half, but his kickoffs, you can see his leg strength is really good. And that's what the coaches were waiting to see, and I think that's why Sturgis has hung on to the roster is because Parkey was coming back from the injury last year, and they wanted to make sure he's fully there before they let go of Sturgis. And that's at least my belief. I don't know that for sure. But Parkey not only drilled the kickoffs out of the end zone, he made the field goal. I mean, I didn't see anything that Parkey did wrong yesterday. Even the squib kick, I know it's something that's supposed to be really easy to do, was done well at the end of the first half when there was only a couple seconds left. So I think Parkey's got the job.
Going through Scott Grayson's grades, check out the whole list over at 973ESPN.com. Another guy who was a little unexpected, his situation was Dorial GreenBeckham. This is a guy, Scott, who he just showed up, and Doug Peterson apparently decided, hey, why don't you go out there and see what happens? You gave him a D, though. Why'd you give him a D?
I gave him a D because I just didn't think that – well, he had one ball that was thrown behind him. And, look, if you're brought in here to be, competing for one of the top spots at the wide receiver position, I know you're just here for a couple days. And I tried to I was really jockeying with him about whether to give him a C or a D. I mean, it wasn't his fault on the one pass, the fade route. Chase Daniel threw an awful pass, and I didn't dock him at all in that regard. But the one that was thrown behind him, I mean, it's the NFL. You got to catch those, and it happened to Agholor, earlier in the game or earlier in the game. But he's only been here 2 days, and I questioned whether or not I should give him a C or a D. But I credit Doug Peterson for not wasting a game and making him sit just because he was only there for a couple days. They drew up 2 plays for him. They gave him to him. They tried to see a little bit of what he could do, and I'm excited for what he could bring to this receiving corps. So don't read into his grade too much in terms of that. But I think he will be a big addition. I think it's a good get for the Eagles, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of what he can do, maybe with some of the ones next week.
Speaking of the receivers, a lot of light on the receivers, and one of them you mentioned was Nelson Agholor. You gave him a C. I mean, this is a guy, Scott, one play, makes a great catch, first down. Very next play, drops a ball. I mean, is that what we can expect from him this season, just inconsistency?
I really hope not. But you nailed it. That's exactly why I gave him the C, because of inconsistency. You're right. One play, he climbs a ladder and makes a spectacular catch to move the chains. The next play, they try to go right back to him, and he drops it. And, that's the biggest thing that he really needs to get a grasp on now. I think he's really worked, and I talked about this with Mike in the past, in camp and in the first preseason game. You can see his footwork at the line of scrimmage seems to have gotten better to help him get off the line. Now he's got to do his job, which is catch the ball. And he's not the only one on that team that has that problem. I didn't grade him, but Josh Huff is in my opinion, not showing anything. And Nelson Agholor right now with Jordan Matthews out and Dorial GreenBeckham essentially not ready yesterday, Agholor had to be the guy to make some plays, and he did make some, but he's got to make a few more, and he's got to be more consistent, or else the quarterbacks just aren't going to come to him as much.
The one receiver you did give a good grade to is Paul Turner. I mean, Scott, he has 9 catches on 10 targets, and the one target he didn't catch wasn't even his fault. It's like every time the ball gets near him, he makes a catch, and I contend that this guy is earning himself a spot on the roster, and somebody's going to be left out.
In my opinion, I gave him an A because you're right. I thought that he did an excellent job. Of course, he had a highlight reel catch, too, with the one-handed grab. Anything in his catch radius, he's pulling it in. I mean, he's been really impressive, and this is why preseason can be fun when you see some guys like this really turn some heads. And at this point, I would like to see him run with the ones in place of Josh Huff, just to see what he can do and to see if he can, everybody loves Josh Huff's speed, but his speed means nothing if he doesn't catch the ball. And Paul Turner, he's catching the ball, and I'd rather see what he can do once he catches it with some yards after the catch. He runs great routes. The kid's done nothing but great things so far, and I'd like to see that continue.
I look at Paul Turner right now, and I would love to have a lineup where it's him, Matthews, and Agholor as the 3 receivers, and kind of just see what happens. What about you?
Yeah, I'd almost rather see him more in like a 4-receiver set because I really think Dorial GreenBeckham's going to work his way into this top line too. And Turner could certainly be out there in some situations with those 3, with the other 2 that you mentioned. I think it's time for the coaching staff to see kind of where he could fit in. And maybe he's a guy who comes in and spells Jordan Matthews in the slot occasionally. He might be that guy who comes in every now and then when somebody needs a blow. But I'd like to see him have the opportunity in the 3rd preseason game to get another chance to see what he can do.
We're talking with Scott Grace. You can catch his Grayson's grades after every Eagles game this season over at 97.3 ESPN.com. We're reviewing the Eagles' 2nd preseason game. Another guy you gave a good grade to was a guy who I'm so happy you gave him a good grade because Nolan Carroll, it wasn't just the interception. It was the fact that throughout the whole game, he was playing like a shutdown corner, the deflection on the one pass that he had early in the game, and the interception he had, that wasn't I accidentally threw it to the wrong spot. I mean, he literally was a playmaker stepping in front of the receiver, getting that ball, running it back. Talk about some of more of your impressions from Nolan Carroll last night. Yeah,
I mean, you nailed it. I felt like he's really turned a corner at this point. No pun intended, but I think in the past
that was a good one though.
He in the past I kept wondering why aren't they giving him more opportunities, and I don't know if it was a Chip Kelly thing or if it was Billy Davis, but they're gone, and he's gotten an opportunity here, and he definitely nailed it last night. He's, as I said in the grades, he was hip for hip with his assigned receiver every time. Almost looked like they were, held together with a bungee cord. And then, he jumped the route. I mean, very well jumped the route, and that's what allowed him to break away once he caught the ball and, make it a pick 6. And, Nolan Carroll, to me, if he can establish himself as that other corner, he really helps the defense in terms of its depth by doing that. It allows, Brooks to go in more on the inside. It allows, Eric Rowe to be further down, in the order, which is where he needs to be at this point because he's not impressed anybody. And, Nolan Carroll, to me, if he can do that again in the next game, because everybody always talks about the 3rd preseason game. That's the big one. It's the dress rehearsal. Here's Nolan Carroll's chance to establish himself as that other corner and really take that spot and grab it. The defense had 4 interceptions last night. They forced, I believe, 9 turnovers now in the last 6 quarters. And obviously you gave Jim Schwartz an A, but to me, the real highlight was the fact that later on the list you have the defensive line, because I saw a lot of things from Brandon Graham, from Means, and from Benny Logan that I really liked last night, Scott. The front 4 is impressing me very much, and what is impressive to see is that this is a new defense, and that, in my opinion, they're further ahead than I kind of expected them to be. Without really throwing any blitzes in there, they are getting pressure. And that's what, to me, makes the secondary look so good right now. In the past, when you had Billy Davis, you weren't creating pressure. You were playing passive. You're thinking, well, let's just cover, and we'll eventually get to the quarterback. you're making your defensive backs cover for so long. It's just so hard in the NFL to stay with these receivers that long. And that, to me, is what was one of their biggest downfalls a year ago. Now you have a front four that's creating pressure. Your defensive backs don't have to cover for as long. And knowing that, they can jump routes. They can be more aggressive with the receiver that they're guarding. And in the front four and Jim Schwartz coaching it, to me, I think that's going to be one of the reasons why, if you ask me now, if the Eagles make the playoffs, how will it happen? It'll be because his front four dominates. And I think they have the ability and the potential to do that this year.
You get all of Scott Grayson's grades from the Eagles' second game on 97.3 ESPN.com. Scott, one more guy I want to hit on with you is the quarterback, Sam Bradford. The fact that this is a guy who, there's been so many divergent opinions about him. Is he good? Is he bad? Could he be great? Could he be horrible? But to me, what he did last night, he was 14 of 19 for 115 yards, and he didn't turn the ball over. And to me, I don't need my quarterback to be Dan Marino. I need Sam Bradford to not lose me the game. And to me, while he wasn't great last night, there was things I had issues that he did. I felt that he did a good enough job to make me feel comfortable that he's not going to lose me games in 2016.
No, and I'll tell you what I liked seeing was Bradford getting the opportunity to call, some audibles and seeing if they were successful. And for the most part, they were. So that shows me he can read the defense well enough to get out of a bad play and into one that might be at least moderately successful. And as long as you're doing that, you have a good chance of moving the chains. Now, yeah, he was 14 of 19, and I know Josh Huff dropped one for him, and Agholor dropped one. I think he was the quarterback at the time. Yeah, there's a couple more completions, a couple more yards, and you're right. The other part of what I said about how the Eagles make the playoffs this year, defensive line has to dominate. Defense has to play well, but you kind of said it too. The offense can't turn it over, and if they can manage the game well enough offensively, and I know quarterbacks hate that term, managing the game, but to me that's what Bradford has to do. If he can do that, make some throws in some tight spots occasionally, and I thought his accuracy was overall pretty good last night. There was one miscommunication with Brent Selleck. Selleck sat down in his zone. Bradford thought he was continuing his route. Those can sometimes turn into interceptions, but those two, it's preseason. You think they'll get that nailed down. Yeah, I mean, if Bradford plays like that last night, it's probably good enough. You're in games and potentially winning them, and I guess at this point, for Eagles fans, that's a good thing.
You can get all of Scott Grayson's grades over at 97.3 ESPN.com. After every Eagles game, Scott goes through numerous players, the good, the bad, the ugly. He gives it all to you. Scott, appreciate you joining me on a Friday.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much, Josh.